I'm not interested in turning my beliefs into your commandments or presenting personal preferences as collective standards. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to challenge the idea that anyone should. Welcome to the Endlessly Elated podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Pagan, founder of Endlessly Elated, cook, designer, storyteller, and soon-to-be author. But at heart, I'm a woman endlessly curious about what it means to live with intention. Week after week, we'll slow down, reflect, ask life's big questions, and uncover the lessons that help us live more thoughtfully. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. I actually wrote about this a while back, and it's been top of mind lately after having this conversation with a friend recently. So I wanted to share my thoughts. There is this unspoken pressure in today's world to have a stance, a very sharp opinion, a headline that declares exactly what you're for, and even more importantly, what you're against. The more polarizing you are, the more authority you appear to hold, and we, society, reward it. Those bold declarations, the oversimplified absolutes. When I wrote about this roughly a year ago, it had reared its head while having a conversation with my then manager, as well as echoing feedback I'd also received from a seasoned book agent. And can I just say, these two women are brilliant, so it has nothing to do with them, but it does illustrate how perhaps we can all fall victim to it. At the time, we were discussing how we couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but there was something about my stance that wasn't quite landing. That for as long as I had been doing what I do, food, design, and even wellness, I wasn't gaining the traction that by industry standards should have come after years of showing up and sharing as I had. So we went deep into messaging, those branding exercises, and the questions came one after another. What's your point of view? Where do you stand on this or that? How do you make it loud enough to be heard? It wasn't confrontational. It was actually very thoughtful, but still the subtext was clear. If I wanted to be seen, I needed to be more direct, more opinionated, louder, and somehow even more sure of myself. And while these to me can come off as buzzwords, what I think we were all concluding is that I needed to be polarizing because I wasn't grabbing enough attention. I wasn't provoking my audience enough, that I must lead with what not to do instead of how I was actually doing it. It's that kind of content that warns 5 mistakes you're making or never buy this again. But that isn't me. And becoming that would make me inauthentic. But truth be told, I tried it and it didn't work. It taught me that nothing built without your truest expression ever becomes something meaningful. But here's what I'm perfectly sure of. I'm sure that this entire premise is flawed. I'm also sure that our obsession with strong stances and neatly packaged opinions has dulled our ability to think critically and create our own. And also, here's my hot take. My stance is not to tell you what to think, but to challenge the idea that anyone should. To take what I share not as doctrine, but as an invitation to pause and probe and choose what's true for you, to ultimately be intentional. Because I do have thoughts, I do have opinions, and by the way, I am sure of myself. But I also hold them with the understanding that they are personal, not prescriptive. My convictions are not universal truths, and they were never meant to be adopted without question. I'm not interested in turning my beliefs into your commandments or presenting personal preferences as collective standards. I don't need to be the loudest in the room to hold a strong point of view. And I certainly don't need to manufacture controversy in order to feel validated as a thought leader. What I am here to do is the complete opposite. I want to share what I've learned, rooted in my own lived experience, me constantly learning and evolving. And most of all, I'm here to create space, not to fill it. Because real expertise, I believe, isn't about imposing conclusions. It's about creating the conditions to spark your own. And I'm not willing to abandon who I am just to make it more digestible in the eyes of the algorithm. So as I sit here roughly a year later, this belief has only deepened. While the conversation continues to come up and linger, it's now urging me to examine not just my response, but the very foundation of my perspective. So here it is. Isn't the notion that if you are anything like me and you quote unquote lack a loud stance in itself an oversimplification? In my own life, I've seen how quickly we project polarization where none was ever intended. We've been conditioned to interpret preference as opposition, to assume that to love one thing is to completely reject its counterpart, as if nuance can exist. I mean, think about this. For me, it's as if I can't prioritize wellness and eat clean while also cooking and indulging in my mom's Puerto Rican recipes. Or that in design, not gravitating towards a certain color or style means I believe it has no place, or worse off, no value. And yet, some will say I'm contradicting myself, or backtracking, or too afraid to pick a lane. Because if it's not one thing, then it must be another, right? But as a human with lots of complexity, my stance was never that rigid to begin with. I mean, why can't we hold it all? And I know not every idea, choice, or belief deserves the same treatment. Yes, different things ask for different responses. But why can't we live in a world where opposing things can coexist, where loving something doesn't require hating what it's not, and where hating something doesn't invalidate loving its counterpart? We've been taught to view opinions as absolutes, that any expression of enthusiasm must carry an undercurrent of rejection, that to choose one thing is to renounce another. And that too, I believe, is part of the problem. Because without the ability to distinguish between what applies here and what applies there, we start outsourcing our beliefs. In the end, going along with it is easy. But standing with our complexities is the most deliberate thing we can do. There's a quote by Rick Rubin that feels especially true here. He says, "We are born artists, and then society does its best to beat it out of us." And that's a quiet tragedy, isn't it? That we're born with a point of view, our point of view, curious, instinctual, alive, and somewhere along the way we're taught to trade it for someone else's, a louder, more polarizing perspective in this day and age. But we don't need to. We can listen, we can learn, and we can gather ideas and insights and still always return to ourselves. Because that's the invitation, not just to have a stance, but to ensure it's truly our own. I'm going to pause here. If you're listening on the free feed, this is where today's episode ends. I'm going to take this a bit deeper, what's underneath all of this, the real reason we're so desperate sometimes for someone to just tell us what to think, and what we're actually giving up when we let them. To continue, join me inside the subscriber space. You'll find the link to upgrade in the show notes. Make sure to follow wherever you stream your podcasts, and if this resonated, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Thank you for listening. I'll meet you right back here next week with only 2 more episodes left of the season.